This is the story of Dracula from 1897 by Bram Stoker. Jonathan Harker's journal, Captain Shortland, May 3rd, Bistritz, left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st of May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. I should have arrived at 6:46, but the train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place. From the glimpse which I got of it from the train, and the little I could walk through the streets, I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late, and would start as near the correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the West End, entering the East, the most western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which is here of noble width and depth, took us among the traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time and came after nightfall to Klausenburg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner a rather supper chicken, and done up with some red pepper, which was very good, but thirsty also. Mom got the recipe for Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika handel, and that, as it was a national dish, I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having had some time at my disposal when in London, I had visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in dealing with a nobleman of the country. I find that the district named that he had, as in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathians mountains, one of the west and least known portions of Europe, I was not able to light on any map or were given the exact location of Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own ordnance survey maps. But I found that Bistritz, the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes, as they may refresh my memory when I walk over my travels with Mina. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and, mixed with them, the Wallachs, who are the descendants of the Dacians, Magyar in the west, and Circes in the east and north. I am going among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered this country in the 11th century, they found the Huns settled in it. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horse how of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting. Ma'am, I must ask the Count all about them. I do not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have had something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe, and it was still thirsty. Towards morning I slept and was waked by the continuous knocking at my door. So I guess I have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika and a sort of porridge of maize flour, which they said was mamalaga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish which they call impletata. Mom got a recipe for this also. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started a little before 8, or rather, it ought to have done so, for after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. We ought they be in China? All day long we seemed to dawdle through the country, which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on top of the steep hills, such as we see in old myths. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams which seemed, from the wide stony margin on each side of them, to be subject to great floods. It takes a lot of water and running strong to sweep the outside edge of a river clear. At every station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds and all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France and Germany with short jackets and round hats and homemade trousers. But the others are very picturesque, so they say. The women looked pretty, except when you got near to them, but they were very clumsy about the waist. They had full white sleeves of some kind or another, and most of them had big belts with a lot of stripes or something fluttering from them like the dresses in a ballet. But of course there were petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy dirty white trousers with linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts nearly a foot wide, and all a sudden over white brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked into them, and had long black hair and heavy black mustaches. They are very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage they would sit down at once as some old oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I'm told, very harmless and rather wanting a natural self-assertion. It's some on the dark side of twilight when we got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place, being particularly on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it into Bukovina. It has had a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions. At the very beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people, the causalities of war probably being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Crown Hotel, which I found, to my great delight, to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress, which undergarment with long double apron front and back of colored stuff fitting almost too tight for my modesty. When I came close, she bowed and said, "The Her Englishman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white shirt sleeves, who had followed her to the door. He went, but immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting of you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow, the diligence will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass, my carriage will await you and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend Dracula." May 4th. I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count, directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me. But on making inquiries as to details, he seemed somewhat reticent, and pretended that he could not understand my German. This could not be true, because up to now we have conversated and he understood me perfectly. At least he answered my question. Well, exactly as if he did. Well, he and his wife, the old lady who received me, looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled out that the money had been sent in a letter, and that was all he knew. When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me of his castle, both he and his wife crossed themselves, and saying absolutely that they knew nothing at all, simply refused to speak any further. It was so near the time of starting that I had no time to ask of anyone else, for it was also very mysterious and not at all comforting. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical way, "Oh, must you go? Must you go, Herr?" She was in such an excited state that she almost lost her way in the grip of all the German she knew, and she mixed it up with all sorts of languages that I knew nothing about. I was just able to follow her by asking many questions. When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaging a very important business, she then said again, "Well, do you not know what day it is?" I answered, "Well, it is the 4th of May." But she shook her head, and she said again, "Oh, yes, I know that, but do you know what day it is?" On my saying that I do not understand what she means, she went on, "Well, it is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things of the world will come full sway? Do you know where you're going, and what are you going to do at all?" Well, she was in such an evident distress that I tried to comfort her, but without any effect. Finally she went down on her knees and implored me to please do not go, Herr. Well, at least wait a day or two before starting. It was all so very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable. However, there were business to be done, and I could not allow anything to interfere with it. I therefore tried to raise her up and said, as gravely as I could, that I thanked her, but my duty was important, and I must go. Well, she then rose and dried her eyes, and she took a crucifix from her neck and offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for as an old English churchman I have thought that regarding such things as some measure of idolatry, and yet it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well, and in such a state of mind. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary around my neck and said, "Please, for your mother's sake," and she went out of the room. Oh, I'm writing upon this part of the journey while I'm still waiting for my ride of my coach, which is of course late, and the crucifix is still around my neck, whether it is the old lady's fear or the many ghostly traditions of this place for the crucifix itself, I do not know. But I'm not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring my goodbye. Oh, here comes my ride. May 5th, in the castle. The grey of the morning has passed, and is high over the horizon distance, but seems jagged. Whether with trees or hills I know not, for it is so far off that big things and little are mixed. I'm not sleepy, and as I'm not to be called till I awake, naturally I write till sleep comes. There are many odd things to put down, at least who reads them? Many fancy that I dined too well before I left Bursett's. Let me put down my dinner exactly what I dined. Well, they call it a rubber steak. These are bits of bacon, onion, and beef, seasoned with a little red pepper, and strung on sticks and roasted over the fire. Well, in the simplest style of the London cat's meat. The wine was golden Mediox, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is however not disagreeable, but I only had a couple of glasses of this and nothing else. When I got on the coach to drive, had not taken his seat, and I saw him talking with the landlady. They were evidently talking about me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people were sitting on the bench outside the door, which they called by the name of word-bearer, came and listened and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words, often repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd, so I quietly got my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them up. Well, I must say they were not cheering of me, for amongst them were Ordog, Satan, Pokal, Hell, Stekoisa, Witch, Frolok, and Vloslock, both of which meant the same thing, one big Slovak and the other Serbian, for something that's either werewolf or vampire. I must ask the Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by his time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross, and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some difficulty I could fellow passengers tell me what they meant. He would not answer it at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm or guard against the evil eye. Well, this was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed so kind-hearted and so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not be touched. Oh, I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn-yard and its crowd of picturesque figures, crossing themselves as they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage. Oh, oleander and green trees and green doves clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, his wide-lined drawers covered the whole front of box seat, cuts they call them, cracked his bag whip over his 4 small horses, which ran abreast, and we set off on our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears in this beauty scene. As we drove along, although had I known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay green sloping land of forsyths and woods, and here and there were some hills, crowned with clumps of trees and former farmhouses. The blank cable end of the road, There were everywhere unbewildering masses of fruit blossom, apple, plum, pear, cherry, and as we drove by I could see the green grass under the trees spangled with fallen petals. In and out amongst the trees and the green hills, what they call here the Mittelland, ran the road, losing itself as it swept ready to grassy curve, or was shut out by the strangling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillside like tongues of flame. The road was rugged, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand then what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time and to reach Bongo Punt in a very short period. I was told that the road is in summertime excellent, but it had not yet been put in order after the winter snows, and in this respect it is different from the general run of roads in the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept in too good order of old. The Hospedrids would not repair them, lest the Turks should not think that they were preparing to bring in foreign troops, and so hasten the war, which was always really at loading point. Beyond the green hills swelling up on the road where the Midlands rose mighty slopes of forests to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon soon falling full upon them and bringing out all the glorious colours of this beautiful range, deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where cross and rock mingled, and an endless perspective of jagged rock and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which, as the sun began to sink, we saw now and again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept around the base of the hill and opened up the lofty, snow-covered peak of a mountain which seemed, as we wound up in our serpent way right before us. "Look, isn't that God's seat?" And he crossed himself reverently as we wounded our endless way, and the sun sank lower and lower behind us. The shadows of the evening began to creep around us. It was all emphasized by the fact that the snowy mountains still held the sunset, seemed to glow out with delicate cool pink. Here and there we passed Czechs and Slovaks, all in picturesque attire, of course, but I noticed that the water was painfully prevalent. By the roadside were many crosses as we swept by. My companions all crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant woman or man kneeling before a shrine, who did not even turn around as we approached, but seemed in itself surrendered all of this devotion for the Lord, to have neither eyes nor ears for the world. There were many things new to me. For instance, high ricks in trees, and here and there very beautiful mosses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver through the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a later wagon, the ordinary peasant cart, which is like long and snake-like vertebra, calculated to soothe the iniquities of the road. Well, on this were sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Czechs with their white, and the Slovaks with their colored sheepskin, the latter carrying in lance fashion their long staves with the axe at hand, As the evening fell, it began to get very cold, and the growling twilight seemed to merge into darkness and mistiness in the gloom of the trees. Oak, beech, and pines stood in the valley which ran deep between the spurs of the hills as we ascended to the pass. The dark first stood out there, and there against the background of a grey late-lying snow, sometimes as the road was cut through the pine woods, and that seemed in the darkness to be closing down upon us, great masses of greyness, which here and there were bestrewed the trees, closing down upon us as well. Well, sometimes the hills were so steep that, despite our driver's haste, the horses could only slowly walk, right? I wished to get down and walk upon them, as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. No, no, he said, you must not walk there. The dogs are way too fierce. And then he added, with what he'd evidently meant for grim pleasantry, for he'd looked around to catch the approving smiles of the rest. Well, and you may have enough of such matters before we go to sleep. The only stop he would make was a moment to pause to light his lamps. When it grew even darker, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after the other, as though urging him to further his speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and wild cries of encouragement urged them on to further exertions. Then, through the darkness, I could see a sort of patch of grey light ahead of us, as though there were a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked in its great leather springs and swayed like a boat tossed on a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew even more level, and we appeared to fly along. Then the mountain seemed to come nearer to us on each side and to frown down upon us. We were entering on the Borgo Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they pressed upon me that an earnestness which would take no denial. These were certainly of an old and varied kind, but each was given in simple good faith, with a kindly word and a blessing, and that strange mixture of fear, meaning movements which I had seen outside the hotel in Britain, the sign of the cross and the guard against the evil eye. Then, as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side the passengers, craning over the edge of the coach, peering eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected to happen, but though I asked each passenger, no one would give me the slightest explanation. This state of excitement kept me on for some little time, and at least, well, what we saw before us, the pass opening onto the eastern side, there were sole darkness and rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy oppressive scent of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated two atmospheres, and that now we had got into the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was taking me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the dark blackness, but all was black. The only light was a flickering ray of our own lamp, in which steamed from our hard-driven horses rose in white clouds. We could see the sandy road lying white before us, but there was on it no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness, which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking on what I had best to do, but the driver looked at his watch and said, "Did he utters something which I could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly and in such a low of a tone, I thought it was an hour less than the time." Then, turning to me, he said, in German, worse than my own, "There is no carriage here. The Herr is not expected after all. He will now come on to Buklova and returning tomorrow. The next day, or better the next day." Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. Then, among the chorus of screams of the peasants, and an universal crossing of themselves, a calash with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps, as the rays fell on them, that the horses were coal black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man, with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight. As he turned to us, he said to the driver, "Well, you are nearly tonight, my friend." The man stammered in reply, "The English Herr was in a hurry," to which the stranger replied, "That's why I suppose you wished him to go back to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend, I know too much, and my horses are swift." As he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on a hard-looking mouth, with very red lips and sharp teeth as white as ivory. One of my companions whispered to another the line from Burger's Lenore, "Den de Tode reiten schnell." That means, "For the dead travel fast." The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passengers turned his face away, and at the same time were putting out his 2 fingers and crossing himself. "Give me the Herr's luggage," said the driver, and with exceeding alacrity my bags were handed out and put in the calash. Then I descended from the side of the coach. As the calash was close alongside, the driver held me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word he shook his reins and horses stern, and then he swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the steam from the horses of the coach by the light of the lamps, and projected against it the figures of my late companions crossing themselves. But the driver cracked his whip and called to his horses. Off they swept to the way of Bukovina. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill, and a lonely feeling came over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders and a rug across my knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chill, mein Herr, and my master the Count bade me to take care of you. There is a flask of Sivovitz." Well, that means a plum of brandy and of the country, alcohol, underneath the seat, if you so inquire. I did not take it, but it was a comforting feeling to know it was there at the same time. I felt a little strangely, and not a little frightened. I think, had there been any alternative, I should have taken it, instead of persecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along. Then we made a complete turn, and we went along another straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over this same ground again, and so I took note of the same salient point and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what this all meant. Oh, but I really was afraid to do so, for though that place as it was in any process to have no effect on being any type of good way, but by and by, however, as I was curious to know how many time had passed, I struck a match and by its flame looked at my watch. It was within a few minutes after midnight. Oh, this gave me a sort of a shock, as I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experience. At once I remembered what the woman said. Might she have been right? Well, then I waited, with a sick feeling of suspense. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in the farmhouse far along the road, a long anguishing wailing as it was from afar. The sound was taken up by another dog and another dog, and another one, until, borne in the wind which now sighed softly through the paths, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from over the country, as far as the imagination could grasp it. Through the gloom of the night, at the first howl the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and then they quieted down, but shivered and sweated as though after a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance from the mountains on each side of us began a louder and sharper howling, that of the wolves, which affected both the horsemen and myself in the same way, for I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they reared again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all of his great strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend and to stand before them. He petted and soothed them, and whispered something in their ear, as I have heard of horse tamers doing so, and with extraordinary effect, for under his caresses they became quiet and manageable again. Well, though they still trembled, the driver again took his seat, and then we shook and ran off into the distance. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, he suddenly turned down a narrow roadway, which ran sharply to the right. Soon we were hemmed in with trees, which in place arched right over the roadway till we passed as though through a tunnel, and again great frowning rocks guarded us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, and we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and the branches of the trees crashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine, powdering snow began to fall, so that soon we and all around us were covered in a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing around on us from every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He kept turning his head to his left and to his right, but I couldn't see anything through the darkness. Suddenly away on our left I saw a faint flickering blue flame. The driver saw it at the same moment. He at once checked the horses and jumped to the ground, disappeared into the darkness. Oh, I didn't know what to do now he was away. Alas, the howling of the wolves grew closer, but whilst I wondered, the driver suddenly appeared again, without a word took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeating itself endlessly. And now, looking back, it's like a sort of awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared too near the road, that even in the darkness around us could watch the driver's motion. He went rapidly to where the blue flame rose. It must have been very faint, for it did not seem to illuminate the place around it at all, and gathering a few stones formed them into some device. Once there appeared a strange optical effect. When he stood between me and the flame, he could not obstruct it, for I could see its ghostly flicker all the same. This startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it that my eyes deceived me, straining through the darkness. Then, for a time, there was no blue flame, and we sped towards through the gloom, with the howling of the wolves around us, as though they were following us in a moving circle. At last, the time came when the driver went further afield than he had yet gone, and during his absence the horses began to tremble worse than ever, and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether, but just then the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling, pine-clad rock, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible in the grim silence which held them than even when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralyzing fear. It's only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can understand their true import. All at once, the wolves began to howl, as though the moonlight had some sort of peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped around and reared, and looked helplessly around with eyes that rolled in a way painful to see, but the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce to remain within it. I called the coachman to come, for it seems to me that our only chance was to try to break out through the ring and to aid his approach. I shouted and beat to the side of the caleche, hoping that the noise would scare the wolves from that side, and so to give him a chance to reach the strap. How he came there I know not, but I heard his voice raised in a tone of imperious command, and he looked towards the sound. I saw him stand in the roadway as he swept his long arms, as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle. The wolves fell back and back further still, and just then a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so that we were all in the darkness again. When I could see again, the driver was climbing into the caleche, and the wolves had disappeared. And this was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came over me, and I was too afraid to speak or to move at all. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in almost complete darkness, for the rolling clouds obscured the moon. We kept on ascending, with occasional periods of quick descent, but in the main always ascending. Suddenly, I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed jagged line against the moonlit sky. Well, Chapter 2, Jonathan Harker's Journal continued. May 5th. Well, I must have been asleep, for certainly I have been fully awake. I must have noticed the approach of such a remarkable place. In the gloom the courtyard looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it on the great round arches. It perhaps seemed bigger than it was in reality. I have not been able to see it by daylight. When the calash stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me on light. Again, I could not but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vise that could have crushed mine if he had chosen. And then he took out my strap and placed them on the ground beside me as I stood closer to the door, old and sudden, with large iron nails, and set in a projecting doorway of massive stone. I could see even in the dim light that the stone was massively carved, but that the carving must have been worn by time and weather. As I stood, the driver jumped again into his seat and shook his reins. The horses started forward, and trap and all disappeared down a dark opening. I stood in silence where I was, for I did not know what to do. Of bell or knocker there was no sign, though these frowning walls and dark window openings, it was not likely that my voice could penetrate. The time I waited endlessly. It seemed never-ending, and I felt doubts and fears crowding upon me. What sort of place had I come to? And among what kind of people? What sort of grim adventure? Oh, why was I embarking on this? I am so far away from home. Was this a customary incident in the life of a solicitor's clerk sent out to explain the purchase of a London estate to a foreigner? Solicitor's clerk? Mina would not like that. Solicitor. For just before leaving London I got word that my examination was successful, and I was now a full-blown solicitor. I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if I was awake. It all seemed like a terrible nightmare to me, and I expected that I could suddenly awake and find myself at home with dawn struggling into the window, as I had now and again felt in the morning after a day of overwork. But my flesh answered the pinching test, and my eyes were not to be deceived. I was indeed awake and among the compressions. What I could do was to be patient and to wait what this tomorrow will bring to me. Just as I had come to this conclusion, I heard a heavy step approaching behind the great door, and saw through the chinks a gleam of coming light. Then there was the sound of a rattling chain and the clanking of massive bolts drawn back. A key was turned with the loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall man, clean-shaven, save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot. He had black clothing, without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, in which the flame burned without chimney or globe of any kind, throwing along quivering shadows as it flickered in the dark of the opening door. The old man's motivation for me was to go with him, and he says in English, with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but he stood like a statue, as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into a stone. The instant, however, that I stepped over the threshold, He moved impulsively forward, and holding out his hand to grasp mine, with a strength that made me wince, and effect, which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed so cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead man than of a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Come freely, go safe, and leave something of the happiness you bring." The strength of his handshake was so much akin to that which I had noticed in the driver, whose face I had not seen, but for the moment I doubted if it was not the same person to whom I was speaking now. Then he said, interrogatively, "Count Dracula?" He bowed in a courtly way as he replied, "I am Count Dracula, and I bid you welcome. Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in, the night air is chill, and you must need to eat and rest." As he was speaking, he put the lamp on a bracket on the wall, and stepping out, took my luggage he had carried in before I could forestall him. I protested, but he insisted. "No, sir, you are my guest. It is late, and my people are not available. Let me see to comfort you." He instead insisted on carrying my traps along the passage, and then upon a great winding stair, and along another great passage, and whose stone floor stepped, and it ranged heavily. At the end of his, he threw open the door, and rejoices to see within a well-lit room, and in which was available a spread of supper for me, on which might he had a great fire of logs and freshly replenished flames of fire. Well, the Count halted, putting down his bags, closed the door, and crossing the room opened another door, which led into a small octangular room, lit by a single lamp, and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door and motioned me to enter it. It was a welcoming sight, for there was a great bedroom, lighted and warmed with another log fire, also added to but lately, for the top logs were fresh, which sent a hollow roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, saying before we closed the door, "You will need after your journey to refresh yourself by making your toilet. I trust you will find all your wishes. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth of the Count courteously welcomed me, and seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. Having then reached my normal state, and left all my fears, I discovered that I was half famished with hunger, so I made hasty a toilet. I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood in one of the great fireplaces, leaned against the stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand to the table, and he said, "I pray you be seated and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have dined already, and I do not sup." I handed him the sealed letter which Mr. Hawkins entrusted to me. He opened it and he read it gravely. Then, with a charming smile, he handed to me. One passage of it, at least, gave me a thrill of pleasure. "I must regret that an attack of gout, from which malady I am constant sufferer, forbids absolutely of any travelling on my part for some time to come. But I happy to say I can send a sufficient substitute, one in whom I have very possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy and talent in his own way, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood on his own service, he shall be great to attend on you when you pray during his stay, and shall take your instructions in all matters. The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell at once over so very excellent roasted chicken, this, with some cheese and salad and a bottle of old Tokay, of which I had 2 glasses, was my supper. During the time I was eating, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by degrees all I had experienced. By this time I had finished my supper, and my host Desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and began to smoke a cigar, which he offered me as well, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him. Well, I found him a very, very marked physiognomy. His face was a strong, a very strong aquiline, with high bridges of a thin nose, peculiarly arched nostrils, which loftily domed forehead, and a hairy crowning scantily around temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with brushy hair it seemed to curl on its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel looking, with peculiar sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable rudeness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest of his ears were pale, and the top extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firmed to tough and thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto I had noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they seemed rather white and fine. But seeing them now so closely, I could not notice that they were rather coarse, broad and squat fingers. Strange to say, they were hairs in the center of the palm. The nails were very long and fine, and cut into a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hand touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me. Do as I do, I could not conceal. The Count evidently noticed it and drew back, and with a grim sort of smile which showed more than what he had yet done, his protuberant teeth, sat himself down again on his own side of the fireplace. Well, we were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window I saw the first streak of dawn coming. There seemed in a straight stillness over everything, but as I listened I heard, as if from down below the valley, of the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them. These are the children of the night. What music do they make? It's lovely. Sing, I suppose." Some expression in my face. Strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, you dwellers in this city cannot enter the feeling of the hunter." And then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bed is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away till the afternoon. Go to sleep and dream well." With a courteous bow he opened for me himself the door to the octangular room, and I entered my bedroom. I am in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things, which I dare not confess even to my own soul. Oh Lord, God, please keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. May 7th. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept till late in the day, and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room where we had supped, and found a cold breakfast laid out, with the coffee kept hot in the pot, and being placed to the hearth. There was a card on the table, on which was written, "I have to be absent for a while, and please do not wait for me." I set to and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I had done, I looked for a bell, so that I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in this house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth around me. The table service is of gold, and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. The curtains and upholsteries of the chairs and sofas and the hangings of my bed are the costliest things, and most beautiful fabric, and must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they were centuries old, and though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but they were all worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still, in none of the rooms is there any mirror. Well, there is not even a toilet glass in my table, and I had to get the little shaving glass from the bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not yet seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near the castle, except the howling of wolves. Some of them, after I finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, but it was between 5 and 6 o'clock before I had it. I looked around for something to read, for I did not like to go back to castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room, no book, no newspaper, not even writing materials. So I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite mine, opposing and opposite mine, tried, but it was locked. In the library I found, to my great delight, a vast number of English books, whole shelves full of them, and bound volumes of magazine newspaper. A table in the center was lettered with English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were very recent date. The books were of the most varied kind: history, geography, politics, political economy, and botany, geology, law, all relating to England and English life, and customs and manners. There were even such books of reference as the London Dictionary or Directory, even the red and blue books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Army and Navy lists, and it somehow gladdened my heart to see it, the law list. Whilst I was looking at the books, the door opened, and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way, and hoped that I had a very good night's rest. Then he went on, "Well, I am glad you found your way here, for I am sure there is much that will interest you. These companions," and then he laid his hand on one of the books, "have been good friends to me for so many years. Ever since I had the idea of going to London, have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. How I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share its life, its change, its death, and all that makes it what it is. But alas, as yet, I only know your tongue through books. To you, my friend, I look that I now speak. But, Count, I said, you know and speak English thoroughly. Well, he bowed gravely. Well, thank you, my friend, for your all too flattering estimate. But yet, I fear that I am but a little away on the road I would travel. True, I know the grammar and the words, but yet I know not how to speak them. Well, indeed, I said. Well, but you speak excellently. Not so, he answered. Well, I know that I move and speak in your London, none there would not even know for a stranger. Well, but that's not enough for me. Here I am, a noble and boyar. The common people know me, and I am master. But a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know not of him, and to know not is to care not. I am content if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me, or pauses in his speaking if he hears my words. Ha ha, stranger! I have been so long master that I would be master still, or at least that none other should be master of me. You come to me not along as agent of my friend Peter Hawkins of Exeter to tell me all about your new estate in London. My estate, rather. You shall, I trust, rest there with me a while, so that by our talking I may learn the English intonation, and I would that you tell me when I make an error, even the smallest, in my speaking. I am so sorry I had to be away so long today. But you will, I know, forgive me, one who has so many important affairs in hand. Well, of course, said I, could about being willing, and asked if I might come into that room when I chose. He answered, well, certainly, and added, you may go anywhere you wish in this castle, except where the doors are locked, where of course you will not wish to go. Well, there is a reason that all these things are as they are, and as you see with my eyes and know with my knowledge, you will perhaps better understand. I said I was sure of this, and then he went on. We are in Transylvania, and, well, let me tell you, Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be many strange things to you. Now, from what you have been told of our experiences already, you know something of what strange things there are here. This led to much conversation, and as it was evident that he wanted to talk, if only for talking's sake, I asked him many questions regarding things that had already happened to me or come to my notice. Sometimes he sheered off the subject and turned the conversation by pretending not to understand, but generally he answered all the questions most frankly. Then, as time went on, and I had got somewhat bolder, I asked of him some of the strange things that preceded the night. For instance, why the coachman went to the places where he had seen the blue flames. He had explained to me that this was commonly believed, that on a certain night of the year, last night in fact, when all the evil spirits are supposed to have unchecked way, a blue flame is seen over any place where treasures have been concealed. That treasure has been hidden, he went on, in the region through which you came last night. There can be but a little doubt, for it was the ground fought over the centuries by the Walkmen and the Saxons and the Turk. Why, there is hard a foot of soil in all his region that was not been enriched by the blood of men, patriots or invaders. In old days there were stirring times when the Austrian and the Hungarian came up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet him, men and women, the aged and the children too, and waited their coming on the rocks of the passing, that they might sweep destruction on them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little, but whatever there was had been sheltered in the friendly soil. But how, I said, can it have remained so long undiscovered, when there is sure index to it, if men will but take the trouble to look? Well, the Count smiled, and as his lips ran back over his gums, the long sharp canine teeth were showed out, and he answered, because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. Those flames appear only in one night, and on that night no man of this land will, if can help it, stir without his doors. And, dear sir, even if did he know what to do, why even the peasant then, you tell me, of whom marked the place of the flame, would not know where to look in daylight even for his own work. Well, even you would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find these places again. Well, there you are right, I said. Well, I know more than the dead were even to look for them. Well, then we drifted into other matters. Come, he said at last, tell me of London, of the houses which you have procured for me. With an apology for my omniscience, I went into my room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard a rattling china and silver in the next room, and as I passed through, noticed that the table had been cleared and the lamp lit, for it was by this time deep in the dark. The lamps were also lit in the study or library, and I found the Count lying on the sofa reading, of all things in the world, an English broadsheet guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with him I went into plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything, and asked me myriad questions about the place and its surroundings. He cleared and studied there beforehand all he could to get on the subject of the neighborhood, for he evidently at the end knew very much over than I did. When I remarked this, he answered, well, but my friend, it is not needful that I should. When I go there I shall be alone. And my friend Harker, Jonathan, no, pardon me, I fell into my country's habits of putting your patronymic first. My friend Jonathan Harker will not be my side to correct and aid me. He will be in Exeter, miles away, probably working at papers for the law with my other friend Peter Hawkins. So we went through into the business of the purchase of the estate at Perflute. When I had told him the facts and got the signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter with them ready to post to Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I have come across such a suitable place. I read to him the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribe here. At Perflute on the road I came across just such a place as seemed to be quiet, and where was displayed a dilapidated notice that the place was for sale. It is surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure, built of heavy stones, and has not been repaired for a large number of years. The closed gates are of heavy old oak and iron, all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, no doubt a corruption of the old quarter face, as the house is four-sided, agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. It contains in all some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone wall above mentioned. There are many trees on it which make it in place gloomy, and there is a deep, dark-looking pond, or small lake, evidently fed by some springs. As the water is clear, and flows away in a fair-sized stream, the house is very large and of all periods back, I should say, to medieval times, for one part is of stone immensely thick, with only a few windows high up and heavily buried with iron. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I had not the key of the door leading it from the house, but I have taken with my kodak views of it from various points. The house has been added to, but in a very straggling way, and I can only guess at the amount of ground it covers, which must be very great. There are but few houses close at hand, one being a very large house only recently added to and formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the ground. When I had finished, he said, "Oh, I'm glad that's old and big. I myself am an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day, and, after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not the thing that our bones may lie amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety nor mirth, not the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters, which please the young and gay. I am not longer young, and my heart, though weary years of mourning over the dead, is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken, the shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shades and the shadow. I would be alone with my thoughts when I may. Oh, somehow his words and his look did not seem to accord, or else it was that his cast of face made his smile look malignant and saturnine. Presently, with an excuse, he left me, asking me to put all my papers together. He was some little time away, and I began to look at some of the old books around me. One was an atlas, which I found open naturally at England, as if that map had been much used. On looking at it, I found in certain places little rings marked, and on examining these, I noticed that one was near London, on the east side manifestly, where his new estate was situated. The other two were Exeter, and with Pye at the Yorkshire coast. It was the better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha!" he said. "Still at your books, are you? Well, very good. But you must not work always. Come, I am informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm and we went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready at the table. The Count again excused himself, as he had dined out, and his being far away from home. But he sat, as on the previous night, and chattered whilst I ate. After supper I smoked, as on the last evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions on every conceivable subject. Hour after hour I felt that it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes, and every way I was not sleepy at all, as the long sleep of yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help experiencing the chill which comes over one at the coming of dawn, which is like in its way the turn of the tide. They say that people who are near death die generally at the change of the dawn or at the turn of the tide. Anyone who has, when tired as it were to his post experiences this change in the atmosphere, can well believe it. All at once we heard the crow of a cook coming up with a perpetual chilliness to the clear morning air. "Count Dracula!" He jumped to his feet and he said, "Why, there is the morning again! How I remiss! I am let you stay up so long. You must make your conversation regarding dear new country of England less interesting, so that I may not forget how time flies so fast." And with a courtly bow he quickly left me. I went into my room and I drew the curtains, but there was little to notice. My window opened onto the courtyard. All I could see was the warm grey of quivering sky. As I pulled the curtains again, and have written of this day, May 8th, I began to fear as I wrote in this book that I was getting too diffuse. But now I am glad I went into detail from the first, for there is something so strange about this place and all in it that I cannot but feel so uneasy. I wish I were safe out, or that I had never come. It may be that his strange night existence is telling on me, but would that there were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it, but there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and he. Fear I am myself the only living soul within the place. Let me be prosaic so far as facts can be. It will help me to bear up, and imagination must not be running riot with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say at once how I stand, or seem to. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window, and was just beginning to shave. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I heard the Count's voice saying to me, "Good morning." I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had cut myself slightly, but I did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was so close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder. But there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of a man in it, except myself. This was startling, and coming on the top of so many strange things, was beginning to increase that vague feeling of uneasiness which I always have when the Count is near. But at the instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling on my chin. I let down the razor, turning as I did so half round to look for some sticky plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demonian fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. He drew away, and his hand touched a string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change on him, for the fury passes so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there. "Take care," he said. Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then seizing the shaving glass, he went on, "And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bout of a man's vanity. Away with it!" And opening the heavy window with one prank of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the stones of the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew a word. "It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave unless my watch case or the bottom of my shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal." When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not find the Count anywhere. As I breakfasted alone, it was so strange that I haven't seen him yet. Count never eat or drink. Well, he must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs, and I found a room looking towards the south. Well, the view was very magnificent, and from where I stood, there were very few opportunities of seeing it. The castle is on this very edge of a terrible precipice. A stone falling from the window would fill 1,000 feet before touching anything. As far as the eye can reach it, there is a sea of green, and topped with an occasional deep rift, and there is a chasm. Well, here and there are silver threads, where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forests. But I am not in a halt to describe the beauty, for when I had seen the view explored further, doors everywhere, and all are locked and bolted. In no place save from the windows in the castle wall there is an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. Jonathan Harker's journal continues, "When I found that I was a prisoner of some wild sort of feeling came over me, I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out of every window I could find, but after a little the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all the feelings. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I have behaved like a rat trapped in a house when, however, the conviction had come over to me that I was helpless, and I sat down quietly as I have ever done anything in my life, and began to think over what was the best thing to do. I am thinking still, and as yet have come to no definite conclusion. Of one thing only I am certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am in prison, and as he has done to himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it, he would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan would be to keep my knowledge to myself, and my fears also. Well, I know, either being deceived like a baby by my own fears, or else I am in a desperate situation. I need a shell all my brains come together to get me through this." I had hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below shut, and I knew that the Count had returned. He had not come at once into the library, so I went cautiously to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought, that there were no servants in this house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door, laying the table in the dining room, I was assured of it, for as he has done all these things many an office, surely it is the proof there is no one else to do them. This gave me a fright, for as there is no one else in the castle, it must have been the Count himself, who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. Well, this is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean? That he could control the wolves as he did, by only holding up his hand in silence? How was it that all the people at Brissett's and on the coach had terrible fear for me? What meant the giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the wild rose, of the mountain ash? Oh, bless the good, good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is all that a thing which I have taught and to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should in a time of loneliness and trouble be a help for me. Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Well, sometime, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make up my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight, he may talk to himself. If I turn the conversation that way, he must be very careful. I, however, must not awake his suspicion. Midnight. I have had a long talk with the Count. I asked him on Transylvanian history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, and especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present at them. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar the pride of the house and name is his own pride, and that there is glory in his glory, that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. It seemed to have it with the history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and he walked about the room pulling his great white moustache, and grasping anything on which he laid his hands as though he would crush it by main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We, Suzescas, have right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races. We fought as the lion kings of... Well, it was by this time close and morning, and we went to bed. This diary seems horrible in the beginning of the Arabian Nights, for everything has to break off at cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. May 12th. Well, let me begin with the facts. Bare, meagre facts, verified by books of figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with the experience which I will have for the rest of my own observation or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began by asking me questions on legal matters, and on the doing of certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearing over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters I had been examining at Lincoln's Inn. There was a certain method on the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in a sequence. The knowledge may somehow or sometime be useful to me. First he asked if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he might have a dozen if he wishes, but that I would not be wise, and it had been more than one solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that the change would be certain to militate against his interest. He seemed thoroughly to understand, and went on to ask if there would be any particular difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking, and another to look after shipping, in case local help were needed, in a place far from the home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more fully, so that I might not be any mischance to mislead him. So he said, I shall illustrate your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys from me Through your good self, my place in London. Good. Now here let me say frankly, lest you should think that I strange that I have sought the services of one so far off from London instead of some one resident there, that my motive was that no local interest might serve save my wish only, and as one of London residences might perhaps have some purpose of himself or friend to serve, I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labours should be only to my interest. Now I suppose I, who have much of affairs, wish to ship goods, say to Newcastle or Durham, or Harwich or Dover. Might it not be that I could with more ease to be done by consigning to one in these ports? I answered that I certainly it would be most easy, but that we solicitors and a system of agencies one of the other, so that local work could be done locally in construction from any solicitor, so that the client simply placed himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without further trouble. But, said he, I could be at liberty to direct myself, is it not? Well, of course, I replied, such is often done by men in business. We do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any other person. Good, he said, and then went on to ask about the means of making assignments and the forms to be gone through, and all sorts of difficulties which might arise, but by forethought could be regarded against. I explained all these things to him and to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful, for he had satisfied himself in these points of which he had spoken, and I had verified all as well as I could by the books available. He suddenly stood up and said, "Have you written since your first letter to our friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other?" It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, that as yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anybody. "Well, then, write now, my young friend," he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Write to our friend, to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me until a month from now." "Do you wish me to stay so long?" I asked, for my heart grew cold at the thought of it. "Well, I desire it much now. I will take no refusal. When your master employer what you will engage that someone should come on its behalf, it was understood that my needs only were to be consulted. I have not stinted, is it so? What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interest, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself. And besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes than in his bearing which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished, it could have had me no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his mastery in the trouble of my face, for he began at once to use them, but in his own smooth, relentless way. "I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse of the things other than businesses in your letters. It will doubtless please your friends to know that you are well, and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is it not so?" As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of note paper and 3 envelopes. They were all of the thinnest foreign post, and looking at them, then at him, and noticing his quiet smile, with his sharp canine teeth lying over the red underlip, I understood as well as if he had spoken that I should be careful what I wrote, for he would be able to read it. So I determined to write only formal letters, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Mina, for to her I could write in shorthand which would puzzle the Count, if he had seen it. When I had written my 2 letters, I sat quietly reading a book, whilst the Count wrote several notes, referring as he wrote them to some books at his table, after which, the instant the door closed behind him, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were facing down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances I felt that I should protect myself in every way I could. One of the letters directed to Samuel F. Billington, No. 7 The Crescent, Whitby, another to Herr Leutner in Varna, the third was to Coutts & Co. in London, and the fourth to Herren Klopstock and Billerud Bankers in Budapest. The second and fourth were unsealed. I was just about to look at them when I saw the door handle move. Oh, I sank back at my seat, having just had no time to replace the letter as I had been, and to resume my book before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, and entered the room. He took up the letters on the table, and he stamped them carefully, and then looking at me, and he said, "I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all the things you wish to have." At the door he returned, and after a moment's pause he said, "Now, let me advise you, my dear young friend. Now I will warn you in all seriousness that you should leave this room, and you will not sleep in any other part of this castle. It is very old and has many memories, and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned. Should sleep now or ever overcome you or be like to do, then haste to your own chamber, or to these rooms, for you will rest. Only then will you be safe, but if you don't be careful in this respect, then—" He finished his speech in a gruesome way, for he mentioned with his hands as if he was washing them. I quite understood. My only doubt was as to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery which seemed closing around me. Later I endorsed the last words written, but this time there is no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in my place where he is not. I have placed the crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine that my rest is thus free from dreams, and there it shall remain. When he left me, I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up the stairs to where I could look out towards the south. There was some sense of freedom in the vast expanse, inaccessible though it was to me, as compared with the narrow darkness of the courtyard looking out on this. I felt that I was indeed in prison, and I seemed to want the breath of fresh air. Though it were of the night, I am beginning to feel this nocturnal existence tell on me. It is destroying my nerve. I start at my own shadow, and am full of a sort of horrible imaginings. God knows that there is ground for my terrible fear in this accursed place. I look out over the beautiful expanse, bathed in soft yellow moonlight, till it was almost as light as day. In the soft light in the distant hills became melted, and the shadows in the valleys and gorges of velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was peace and comfort in every breath I drew. As I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me, and somewhat to my left, where I imagined, from the order of the room, that the window of the Count's own room would look out. The window at which I stood was tall and deep, stone mullioned, and, though weather-worn, was still complete, but it was evidently many a day since the castle had been there. I drew back behind the stonework and looked carefully out. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I did not see his face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. And any castle could not mistake the hands which I had so many opportunities of studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it is wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and began to crawl down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. Well, at first I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was some trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of shadow. But I kept looking, and it could not be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stone worn clear of the mortar by that stress of years, and by thus using every projection and iniquity moving downwards to considerable speed, just like a lizard moves along a wall. What manner of a man is this? Of what manner of creature or the semblance of a man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I am encompassed with all this terror, and I don't dare to think of anything. May 15th. Once more I have seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. He moved downwards in a sidelong way, some 100 feet down, and a great deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. When his head had disappeared, I leaned out to try and see more, but without avail. This distance was too great to allow proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now, and thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to do as yet. I went back to the room, and taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I had expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stairs to the hall where I had entered originally. I find that I could pull back the bolts easily enough and unhook the great chain. But the door was locked, and the key was gone. The key must be in Count's room. I must watch. Should his door be unlocked, so that I may get it and escape. I went on to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages, and to try the doors to open from them. One or two small rooms near the hall were open, but there was nothing to see in them except old furniture, dusty with age, and moth-eaten. At least, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway which, though it seemed to be locked, gave a little under pressure. I tried it harder and found that it was not really locked, but that the resistance came from the fact that the hinges had fallen somewhat and the heavy door rested on the floor. Here was an opportunity which I might not have again, so I exerted myself, and, with many efforts, forced it back so that I could enter. I was now in a wing of the castle, further to the right than the rooms I knew, and the story lower down. From the windows I could see that a suite of rooms lay along to the south of the castle. The windows of the end room looking out both west and south, on the latter side as well as on the former, there was a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on 3 sides it was quite impenetrable, and great windows were placed here where sling or brow or covering could not reach, and consequently lightened the comfort impossible to a position which had not been guarded. Was secured to the west was a great valley, and then rising far away great jagged mountain fastnesses, rising peak and sheer rock, studded with mountain ash and thorn, whose roots clung in cracks and crevices and crannies of the stone. This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by the ladies bygone days, for the furniture had more air and comfort than I had ever seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight flooding in through the diamond panes enabled one to see even colours, whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay over all and disguised in some measure the ravages of time and moth. My lamp seemed to be of little effect in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was a dread loneliness in this place which chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it's better than living alone in the rooms which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count, and after trying a little to school my nerves, I found a quick quietude to come over me. Here I am, sitting at a little oak table where in old times possibly some fair lady sat to pen, with much thought and many blushes. Here I spent a love letter and writing in my diary in shorthand, all that has happened since I closed it last. It's 19th century up to date with a vengeance, and yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had and have powers of their own, which modernity cannot kill. Later, the morning of 16th of May, God preserve my sanity, for this I am reduced. The safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live in here, there is but one thing to hope for, that I may not go mad. Indeed, I be not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that of all the foul things that lurk in the hateful place, the Count is the least dreadful to me, that to him alone I can look for safety, even though this be only whilst I can serve the purpose. O great God, merciful God, let me be calm, for out of that may lies madness indeed. I begin to get new lights on certain things which have puzzled me. Up to now, I never quite knew what Shakespeare meant when he made Hamlet say, "My tables, quick, my tablets." This meat that I put it down, etc., etc. For now, feeling as though my own brain were unhinged, or as if the shock had come, must end in its undoing, I turned to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help to soothe me. The Count's mysterious warning frightened me at the time. It frightened me more now when I think of it, for in future he has a fearful hold upon me. I shall fear to doubt what he may say. When I had written in my diary, and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I fell asleep. The Count's warning came into my mind, but it took a pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with it the obstinacy which sleep brings as Eldrada. The soft moonlight soothed it, and the wide expanse without gave a sense of freedom which refreshed me. I determined not to return tonight to the gloom-haunted rooms, but to sleep here of old ladies that sat and sunged and lived sweet lives whilst their gentle breasts were sad of their men-folk away in the midst of their remorseless wars. I drew a great couch out of its place near the corner so that as I lay, I could look at the lovely view to east, to south, and, unthinking of and uncaring for the dust, compose myself for sleep. I suppose I must have fallen asleep, I hope so, but I fear, for all that followed was as storming, real, so real, that now sitting here in the broad full sunlight of the morning I cannot in the least believe that I was all asleep. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in a way since I came into it. I could see along the floor, in the brilliant moonlight, my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me were 3 young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time that I must be dreaming when I saw them, for though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time, and then whispered together. 2 were dark and high aquiline voices, noses like the Count, and great dark piercing eyes that seemed to be almost red when contrasted with the pale yellow moon. The other was fair as can be, with great wave masses of gold hair and eyes like pale sapphires. I seemed somehow to know her face, and to know it in connection with brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing, and at the same time some dreadly fear. I felt it in my heart, a wicked burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It is not good to note this down, lest some day I should meet Mina's eyes and cause her pain. But it is the truth. They whispered together, and then they all 3 laughed, such a silvery musical laugh, but as hard as talk. The sound never could have come through the softness of human lips. It was like the intolerable, tingling sweetness of water glasses when playing on by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head. Come, quit the hand. The other 2 urged her on and said, Go on, you are first, and we shall follow. Yours is the right to begin. And then the other added, He is young and strong. There are kisses for us all. I lie quietly looking out under my eyelashes, and in an agony of delightful anticipation, the fair girl advanced, bent over me, till I could feel the movement of her breath upon me. Oh, sweet was it in one sense, honey sweet, and sent the same tingling through the nerves as her voice, but with a bitter underlining, the sweet, the bitter of offensiveness as one smells in blood. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out, and saw perfectly under their eyelashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the white sharp teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and the chin, and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as she licked her teeth and lips, and could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle to approach nearer and nearer. I could feel the soft shivering touch of the lips on the super-sensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of 2 sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in a languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being as a libidinous storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and, with giant's power, drew it back. The blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazing red with passion. But the Count, never did I imagine such wrath and fury, even to the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light then was lurid, as if the flames of hell fire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like the heavy bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he hurled the woman from him, and then mentioned to the others as though he was beating them back. If it was the same imperious gesture that I had seen used to the wolves, in a voice which I thought was low and almost in a whisper, seemed to cut through the air, and then ring round the room, he said, "How dare you to touch him, any of you? How dare you cast your eyes on him when I had forbidden it? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, or you will have to deal with me." The fair girl with the love of ribald coquetry turned to him, and she answered him, "All you yourself you never loved. You never loved." On this the other woman joined, and such a mirthless, heart, soulless laughter ranged through the room that it almost made me faint to hear. It seemed like the pleasure of friends. Then the Count turned after looking at my face attentively, and he said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I can love, but you yourself can tell it from the past, is it not so? Well, now I promise you that when I am done with him you shall kiss him at your will. Now go, I must awaken him, for there is more work to be done." "Oh, we have nothing tonight," said one of them, with a loud laugh, as she pointed the bag which he had thrown upon the floor, and which moved as though there was some living thing within it. For answer he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a grasp and a low wail of this half-smothered child. The woman closed round whilst I was aghast with horror, but as I looked they disappeared, and with them the dreadful bag. There was no door near to him, and they could not have passed me without my noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight and pass out through the window, for I could see outside dim shadowy forms of the moment before they entirely faded away. And then the horror overcame me, and I sank down unconscious, while his journal continued. I awoke in my bed. But if it be that I had not dreamt, the Count must have carried me here. I tried to satisfy myself on the subject, but I could not arrive at any unquestionable result. To be sure, there were certainly small evidences, such as that my clothes were folded and laid by in a manner which was not my habit. My watch was still unwound, and I am rigorously accustomed to wind it the last thing before going to bed, and many such details. But these things are no proof, for they may have been evidences that my mind was not as usual, and from some cause or another I had certainly been much upset. I must watch for proof. If one thing I am glad, if it was that the Count carried me here and undressed me. He must have been hurried in his task, for my pockets are intact. I am sure his diary would have been a mystery to him, which he would not have booked. He would have taken or destroyed it. As I look around this room, although it has been to me so full of fear, it is now a sort of sanctuary, for nothing can be more dreadful than those awful women who are waiting to suck my blood. May 18th. I have been down to look at that room again in daylight, for I must know the truth. When I got to the doorway of the top of the stairs, I found it closed. It was closed. It had been so forcibly driven against the jamb that the part of the woodwork was splintered. I could see that the bolt of the lock had not been shut, but the door is fastened from the inside. I fear it was no dream, but I must act on this surmise. I am surely in the toils. Last night the Count asked me in the softest of tones that there were 3 letters, one saying that my work here was nearly done, and I should start for home within a few days. Another one, I was starting on the next morning from the time of the letter, and the third that I had left the castle and arrived at Brissot. I would fain have been rebelled, but it felt like the present state of things would be madness to quarrel openly with the Count, whilst I am so absolutely in his power, and to refuse would be to excite his suspicion and to arouse his anger. He knows that I know too much, and that I must not live, lest I be dangerous to him. My only chance is to prolong my opportunities. Something may occur which will give me a chance to escape. I saw in his eyes something of that gathering worth which manifested when he hurled that fair woman from him. He explained to me the posts were few and uncertain, and that my writing now would ensure ease of mind to my friends, and he assured me that with so much impressiveness that he would countermand the later letters, which would be held over the bristles until due time in case chance would admit of my prolonging my stay, that to oppose him would have been to create new suspicion. I, therefore, pretended to fall in with his views, and asked him what dates I should put on the letters. He calculated a minute, and then he said, the first should be June 12th, the second June 19th, and the third June 29th. I know now the span of my life. Oh, God help me. May 28th. There is a chance to escape her, at any rate, of being able to send word home. I, band of Scani, have become to the castle and are camped in the courtyard. These Scani are gypsies. I have noted and notes from them in my book. They are peculiar to this part of the world, though allied to the ordinary gypsies of all the world. There are thousands of them in Hungary and Transylvania who are almost outside the law. They attach themselves as a rule to some great noble or boyar, and call themselves by his name. They are fearless and without religion, save superstition, and they talk only their own varieties of the Romanary tongue. I shall write some letters down, and shall try to get them, to have them posted. I have already spoken them, so my window began acquaintanceship, and took their hats off and made obeisance and many signs, which, however, I could not understand any more than I could their spoken language. I have written the letters. Mina is in Shortland, and I simply ask Mr. Hawkins to communicate with her. To her I have explained my situation, but without the horrors which I may only surmise. It would shock and frighten her to death, were I to expose my heart to her. Should the letters not carry, then the Count shall not yet know my secret or the extent of my knowledge. I have given the letters, and threw them through the bars of my window with a gold piece, and made what sign I could have to have them posted. The man who took them pressed them to his heart and bowed, and then put them in his cap. I could do no more. I stole back to the study and began to read. As the Count did not come in, I have written here. The Count has come. He sat down beside me and said in his smoothest voice as he opened the two letters, "The Saguenay gave me these, of which though I know not whence they come, I shall of course take care. See, they must have looked at it. One is from you, and to my friend Peter Hawkins, the other." Here he caught a sigh of the strangest symbols as he opened the envelope, and a dark look came into his face, and his eyes blazed wickedly. The other is a vile thing, an outrage upon friendship and hospitality. It is not signed. Well, so it cannot matter to us. And he calmly held the letter and the envelope on the flame of the lamp till they were consumed. Then he went on. "The letter to Hawkins that I shall of course send on, since it is yours. Your letters are scared to me. You pardon, my friend, that unknowingly I could break the seal. Will you not cover it again?" He held out the letter to me, and with a courteous bow handed me a clean envelope. I could only redirect it and hand it to him in silence. When he went out to the room, I could hear the key turn softly. A minute later I went over and tried it, and the door was locked. When an hour or two after the Count came quietly into the room, his coming awakened me, for I had gone to sleep on the sofa. He was very cautious and very cheery in this manner, and seeing that I had been sleeping, he said, "So, my friend, are you tired? Get to bed. There is the surest rest. I may not have the pleasure to talk tonight, since there are many labours to me. But you will sleep, I pray." I passed to my room and went to bed. Strange to say, slept without dreaming. Despair has its own calms, I suppose. Well, next day came. This morning when I woke, I thought I would provide myself with some paper and envelopes for my bag, and keep them in a pocket, so that I might write in case I should get an opportunity. But again, a surprise, again a shock. Every scrap of paper was gone, and with all my notes, my memoranda relating railways and travel, my letter of credit, in fact all that might be useful to me where I am once outside the castle. I sat and pondered for a while, and then some thought occurred to me, and I made search of my porte-monnaie and the wardrobe, and where I had placed it with all my clothes. The suit in which I had travelled was gone, and also my overcoat and rug. I could find no trace of them. This looked like some sort of scheme of villainy. Then, a few days later, 17th of June, this morning as I was sitting on the edge of my bed cuddling my brains, I heard without a cracking of whips and pounding and scraping of horses feet up the rocky path beyond the courtyard. With joy I hurried to the window and saw drive into the yard 2 great leather wagons, each drawn by 8 sturdy horses, and at the head of each bear a Sloak with his white hat, great nail-studded belt, dirty little sheepskin, and high boots, that had also their long staves in hand. As I ran to the door, intending to descend and try and join them, through the main hall, as I thought they might be opened for them again in shock, my door was fastened on the outside. Then I ran to the window and cried to them. They locked me up, and my stupidity and pointed out was just the headman of the city came out, and seeing them pointing to my window, said something at which they laughed. Henceforth, no effort of mine, no piteous cry or agonies entreaty, I would make them even look at me. They resolutely turned away. The leather wagons contained great square boxes and handles of thick ropes. These were evidently empty by the ease with which the Slovaks handled them, and by their resonance as they moved were roughly moved. When they were all unloaded and packed in a great heap in the corner of the yard, the Slovaks were given some money by the Sani and spitting on for luck. Ha! The lazy went each to his horse, and shortly afterwards I heard the cracking of their whips die away in the distance. 24th of June. Before morning last night the Count left me early and locked himself into his own room. As soon as I dared, I ran up the window again and looked out of the window which opened south. I thought I would watch for the Count, for there is something going on. The Sani are quartered somewhere in the castle and are doing work of some kind. I know it, for I know that I hear a faraway muffled sound as a mattock and spade, and whatever it is, it must be the end of some ruthless villainy. I had been at the window somewhat less than half an hour ago, when I saw something coming out of the Count's window. I drew back and watched it carefully, and saw the whole man emerge. It was a new shock to me to find that he had on the suit of clothes which I had worn whilst travelling here, and slung over his shoulder in this terrible bag which I had seen the woman take away. And there could be no doubt as to be his quest rather, and in my garb too. This then is the new scheme of evil, that he will allow others to see me as they think, so that he may both leave evidence that I have been seen in the towns or villages posting my own letters, and that any wickedness which he may do shall by the local people be attributed to me. It makes me rage to think that this can go on, and I whilst I'm shut up in here, a veritable prisoner, but without that protection of the law which is even in criminals' right and consolation. I thought I would watch for the Count's return, and for a long time sat dodgingly away at the window. Then I began noticing that there were some quite little specks floating on the rays of the moonlight. They were like the tiniest grains of dust, and they whirled around and gathered in clusters, benevolences of some sort. I watched them with a sense of soothing, and a sort of calm stole over me. I leaned back in the embrasure in a more comfortable position so that I could enjoy more fully a aerial gamboling. Something made me start up. A loud piteous howling of dogs somewhere far below in the valley, which was hidden from my sight. Louder it seems to ring in my ears, and the floated motes of dust take new shapes to the sound as they danced in the moonlight. I felt myself struggling to awake to some call of my instincts. Now my very soul was struggling, and half-remembered sensibilities were striving to answer the call. I was becoming hypnotized. Quicker and quicker danced the dust. The moonbeams seemed to quiver as they went by me into the mass of gloom beyond. More and more they gathered until they seemed to take dim phantom shapes. And then I started broad awake and in full possession of my senses, and ran screaming from the place. The phantom shapes, which were becoming gradually materialized from the moonbeams, were those of the 3 ghostly women to whom I was doomed. I fled and felt somewhat safer in my own room. When a couple of hours had passed, I heard something stirring in Count's room, something like a sharp wail quickly suppressed, and then there was silence, deep, awful silence, which chilled me. With a beating heart, I tried the door, but I was locked in my prison, and I could do nothing, and sat down and simply cried. As I sat, I heard the sound of a courtyard without, an astonishing cry of a woman. I rushed to the woman and, throwing it up, peered out between the bars. There indeed was a woman with a dishevelled hair, holding her hands over her heart as one distressed with running. She was leaning against the corner of the gateway. When she saw my face at the window, she threw herself forward and shouted in a voice laden with menace, "Monster, give me my child!" She threw herself on her knees and raised up her hands. "You must give me my child!" cried the words in her tones, which wrung my heart. Then she tore her hair and beat her breast and abandoned herself in all the violence of extravagant emotion. Finally, she threw herself forward, and though I could not see her, I could hear the beating of her naked hands against the door. Somewhere high overhead, probably on the tower, I heard the voice of the Count calling in his harsh metallic whisper. His call seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling of the wolves. Before many minutes had passed, a pack of them, powered like pens of dam, went deliberated to the wide entrance onto the courtyard. There was no cry of the woman, and the howling of the wolves was but short. Before long they steamed away, singly licking their lips. I could not pity for her, for I know what had become of her child, and she was better dead. What shall I do? What can I do? How can I escape from this dreadful thing of night and gloom and fear? 25th of June morning. No man knows until he has suffered from the night how sweet and how dear to his heart and eye the morning can be. When the sun grew so high his morning that it struck the top of the great gateway opposite my window, the high spot which it touched seemed to me as the dove from the ark had lightened here. My fear fell from me as if it had been a vaporous garment which dissolved in the warmth. I must take action of some sort whilst the courage of the day is upon me. Last night one of my post-dated letters went to post. the first of that fatal series which is to blot out the very traces of my existence from the earth. Let me not think of it. Action! It was always been at night time, but that I have been molested or threatened, or in some way in danger or fear. I have not seen the Count in the daylight. Well, can it be that he sleeps when others are awake? Or that he might be awake whilst others are asleep? I could only get into his room if I could only do it. But there is no possible way. The door is always locked. There is no way I could do it. But yes, there is a way, if one dares to take it. Where is body gone? Why may not another body go? I have seen him. I have seen myself crawl from the window. Why should not I imitate him and go in by his window? The chances are desperate, but my need is more desperate still. I shall risk it. At the worst, it can be my death. And the man's death is not his cause, but the dreaded, hereafter, may still be open to me. Oh, God, help me on my task. Goodbye, Mina. If I fail, goodbye. My faithful friend and second father, goodbye. All and last of all, Mina. Well, some few days later, I have made the effort, and God, helping me, have come safely back to his room. I must put down every detail in order. I went, whilst my courage was fresh, straight to the window on the south side, and at once got outside and the near edge of the stone which runs around the building on this side. The stones are big and roughly cut, and a mortar has been, process of time has been washed away between them. I took off my boots and ventured out on the desperate way. I looked down once, so as to take sure that the sudden glimpse of the awful death would not overcome me. But after that I kept my eyes away from it. I knew pretty well the direction and distance of the Count's window, and made for it as well as I could. Having regard the opportunities available, I did not feel dizzy. I suppose I was too excited, and the time seemed ridiculously short till I found myself standing in the window still and trying to raise up the sash. I was filled with agitation, however, when I bent down and slid feet foremost through the window. Then I looked around for the Count, but with surprise and gladness made the discovery the room was empty. It was barely furnished with odd things, which seemed to have never been used. The furniture was something of the same style that was in the south rooms, and was covered with dust. I looked for the key, but it was not locked. I could not find it anywhere. The only thing I found was a great heap of gold in a corner, gold of all kinds, Roman and British and Austrian and Hungarian and Greek Turkish money, covered with a film of dust as though it had laid long on the ground. None of that I noticed was less than 300 years old. There were also chains, ornaments, some jeweled, but all of them old and stained. At one corner of the room was a heavy door. I tried it, for since I could not find the key of the room or the key of the outer door, which was the main object of my search, I must make further examination, or all my efforts would be in vain. It was opened and led through a stone passage to a circular stairway, which went steeply down. I descended, minding carefully where I went, for the stairs were dark, being only lit by loopholes of the heavy masonry. At the bottom there was a dark tunnel-like passage, through which came a deathly, sickly odour, the odour of old earthly newly turned. As I went through the passage, the smell grew closer and heavier. At last, I pulled open a heavy door which stood ajar, and I found myself in an old ruined chapel, which had evidently been used as a graveyard. The roof was broken in two places with steps leading to vaults, but the ground had recently been dug over and the earth placed in great wooden boxes, manifestly those who had been brought in by the Slovaks. There was nobody about, and I made search for any further outlet, but there was none, and I went over every inch of the ground so as not to lose a chance. I went down even into vaults where the dim light staggered, although it was so dreading on my soul. Into two of these I went, but saw nothing except fragments of old coffins and piles of dust. In the third, however, I made the discovery. There, in one of the great boxes, of which were 50 of all, on a pile of newly dug earth lay the Count. He was either dead or asleep. I could not say which, but for the eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks had the warmth of life thrown all the paler. The lips were red as ever, but there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart. I bent over him, and I tried to find any sign of life, but in vain. He could not have been lain here for long, for the earthly smell would have passed away in a few hours, but the side of the box was its cover, pierced with holes here and there, and though he might have the keys on him, but when to search I saw the dead eyes, and in them, dead though they were, such a look of hate, though unconscious of me in my presence. But I fled from the place, and leaving the Count's room by the window, crawled again up the castle wall. Regaining my room, I threw myself of painting upon the bed and tried to think. 29th of June. Today is the date of my last letter, and the Count has taken steps to prove that he was genuine, for again I saw him leave the castle by the same window in my clothes as he went down the wall, lizard fashion. I wished I had a gun or some lethal weapon, that I might destroy him, but I feared that no weapon worth alone with the man's hand would have any effect on him. I dared not to wait to see him return, for I feared to see those weird sisters. I came back to the library, and I read until I fell asleep. As I was awakened by the Count, who looked at me as grimly as a man can look, as he said, "Tomorrow, my friend, we must part. You return to your beautiful England. I to some work, which I may have such an end that we may never meet. Your letter home has been dispatched. Tomorrow I shall not be here, but I shall be ready for your journey." In the morning came Skani, who gave some labours of their own here, and also some Slovaks when they have gone. My carriage shall come for you, and shall bear you to the Borgo Pass amid the diligence from Bukovonia to Brissets. But I am in hopes that I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula. I suspected him and determined to test his sincerity. Sincerity! That seems like a profanation of the word to write, or in connection with such a monster. So I asked him point blank, "Why may I not go tonight?" "Well, because, dear sir, my coachman and horses are away on a mission." Then I said, "But I would walk with pleasure. I want to get away at once." He smiled. Such a soft, smooth, diabolical smile that I knew there was some trick behind his smoothness, he said. Well, and your baggage? I said, I don't care about it. I can send for it at any time. Then he stood up and said, with a sweet courtesy which made me rub in my eyes, it seemed so real. You English have a saying which is close to my heart, for its spirit is that which rules over ye boyars. Welcome the coming and speed the partying guest. Come with me, my dear young friend. Not an hour shall you wait in my house against your will, though sad at your going, and that your suddenly so desire it. Come, come, with a stately gravity, with the lamp pierced me down on the stairs and along the hall. Suddenly he stopped. Close at hand came the howling of many wolves. It was almost as the sound sprang up the rising of his hand, just as the music of a great orchestra seems to leap under the baton of the conductor. After a pause of a moment, he proceeded in his stately way to the door, drew back the ponderous bolts, unhooked the heavy chains, and began to open it. To my intense astonishment, I saw it was unlocked. Suspiciously, I looked all about, but I could not see any key of any kind. As the door began to open, the howling of the wolves without grew louder and angrier. The red jaws with champing teeth and their blunt claws, feet as they leaped, came in through the opening door. I knew then that the struggle at the moment against the Count was useless. With such allies as these at his command, I could do nothing. But still the door continued to slowly open, and only the Count's body stood in the gap. Suddenly it struck me that this might be the moment and means of my doom. I must be given to the wolves or something. And at my own investigation there was a diabolical wickedness in the great idea. Enough for the Count. And as at last chance I cried out, "Shut the door! I shall wait till morning." And I covered my face with my hands until I hid tears of bitter disappointment. With one sweep of his powerful arm, the Count threw the door shut, and the great bolts clenched and echoed through the hall as they shot back into their place. In silence we returned to the library, and after a minute or two I went to my room. The last I saw of Count Dracula was his kissing his hand to me, with a red light of triumph in his eyes, and now a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of. When I was in my room and about to lie down, I thought I heard whispering at my door. I went to it and softly listened. Unless my ears deceive me, I hear the voice of the Count. Back to your own place. Your time is not yet come. Wait. Have patience. Tonight is mine. Tomorrow night is yours. There was a low, sweet ripple of laughter, and in a rage I threw open the door and saw without the three terrible women licking their lips as I appeared to have. They all joined in a horrible laugh and ran away. I came back to my room and threw myself on my knees. Is this so near the end? Tomorrow? Oh, tomorrow, Lord. Oh, please help me, and those whom I dear. June 30th. Morning. This may be the last words I ever write in this diary. I slept till just before the dawn, and when I woke, threw myself on my knees, for I determined that if death came, he should find me already. At last I feel that subtle change in the air, and knew that the morning had come. Then came the welcome cockcrow, and I felt that I was safe. With a glad heart I opened my door and ran down the hall. I had seen that the door was unlocked, and now escape was before me. With hands that trembled with the eagerness, I unlocked the chains and unhooked them, and threw back the massive bolts. But the door would not move. Oh, despair seized me. I pulled and pulled at the door, and shook it. Massive as it was, it rattled in its casement. I could see the bolt shut. It had been locked after I left the count. Then a wild desire took me to obtain that key at my risk, and I determined then and there to scale the wall again and again the count's room. Oh, he might kill me, but death now seemed more happier than any other choice. Without a pause I rushed up to the east of the window and scrambled down the wall, as before, into the count's room. Oh, glad it was empty, but that was what I was expecting. I could not see a key anywhere, but the heap of gold remained. I went through the door, and in the corner, and down the winding stair, and along a dark passage, to the old chapel. I knew now well enough where to find the monster I sought. That great box was in the same place, close against the wall, but the lid was laid, and it was not fastened down. But with the nails already at their place, they hammered home. I knew I must reach the body for the key, so I raised the lid and laid it back against the wall. And then I saw something which filled my very soul with horror. There lay the Count, but looking as if his youth has been half renewed, for the white hair and the moustache were changed to the dark iron grey, the cheeks were fuller, and the white skin seemed to rub you red underneath. His mouth was redder than before, and on the lips were gouts of fresh blood, which trickled from the corner of the mouth and ran over the chin and neck. Even the deep burning eyes seemed set amongst the swollen flesh, for the lids and the pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if it was a whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted with his repletion. I shuddered as I bent over to touch him, and every sense in me revolted at the contact. But I had to. I have to search or I was lost. The coming night might see my own body in a blanket in a similar way as him. Oh, I felt it all over my body, but no sign. I couldn't find the key anywhere. Then I stopped, and I looked at the Count. There was a mocking smile on the bloated face which seemed to drive me mad. This was the being I was helping to transfer to London, where perhaps for centuries to come he might be amongst its steaming millions, satiate his lust for blood and create new and ever-widening circle of semi-demons to batten on the helpless. The very thought drove me mad. A terrible desire came upon me. I needed to rid the world of such a monster. There was no lethal weapon in hand, but I seized the shovel, which the workman had been using to fill the cases, and lifting it high, struck with the hedge downward at the hateful face. But as I did so, the head turned, and the eyes fell full upon me, with all their blaze of basilisk horror. The sight seemed to paralyze me, and the shovel turned in my hand and glanced from the face, merely making a deep gash above my forehead. The shovel fell from my hand across the box, and as I pulled it away, the flang over the blade caught the edge of the lid, which fell over again, and hid the horrid thing from my sight. The last glimpse I had was that of his bloated face, blood-stained and fixed with a grin of malice which would have held its own on the nethermost hell. Oh, I thought, what should I do? What will be my next move? But my brain seemed to be out of function, and I waited for a despairing feeling to come over me. As I waited, I heard in the distance a gispy song sung by very merry voices, and they were coming closer. And through their song, the rolling of heavy heels and the cracking of whips. Zanny and the Slovaks of whom the Count had spoken were coming. With a last look around at the box which contained the vile body, I ran from the place and gained the Count's room, determined to rush out the moment the door should be opened. With strained ears I listened, and heard downstairs the grinding of the key in the great lock at the falling back of the heavy door. There must have been some other reason of entry, or someone had a key to one of the doors. Then there came the sound of feet tramping and dying away, and some passing which sent up a clanging echo. I turned to run down again towards the vault, where I might find the new entrance. But at the moment there seemed to be coming a violent puff of wind at the door that the winding stair blew to with a shock that sent the dust from the lintels flying away. When I ran to push it open, I found that it was hopelessly fast. I was again a prisoner, and the net of doom was closing around me even more closely. As I write, there is in the passage below a sound of many tramping feet and the crash of weights being set down heavily. Doubtless the boxes with their freight of air. There is a sound of hammering. The door is shut and the chains rattle. There is a grinding of key in the lock. I can hear the key withdraw, and another door opens and shuts. I hear the cracking of locks and bolts. Oh my God, in the courtyard and down the rocky way a roll of heavy wheels, the crack of whips, and the chorus of sighing as they pass into the distance. I am alone in a castle with those awful women. Oh, Mina is a woman, and there is nothing coming. They are devils of the pit, I tell you. I shall not remain alone with them. I shall try to scale the castle well farther than I have yet attempted. I shall take some of the gold with me, lest I want it later I may find a way out of this dreadful place. And then away back to home, away to the quickest and nearest train I can find, away from this cursed spot, from this cursed land, I tell you, where the devil and his children still walk with earthly feet. At least God's mercy is better than that of those monsters, and the precipice is steep and high. At its foot a man may sleep as a man. Oh, goodbye, Mina, goodbye. Letter from Miss Mina Murray to Miss Lucy Westenra. May 9th, my dearest Lucy. Oh, please forgive me for my long delay, but I have been simply overwhelmed with the work. The life of assistant schoolmistress is sometimes trying. I am longing to be with you, and by the sea where we can talk together freely and build our castle in the air. I have been working very hard lately, you must know, because I want to keep up with Jonathan's studies, and I have been practicing shorthand very assiduously. When we were married, I shall be able to be useful to Jonathan, and if I can stenograph well enough, I can take down what he wants to say in his way and write it out for him on the typewriter, at which also I am practicing very hard. I have just a few hurried lines from Jonathan from Transylvania. He is well and will be returning in a week. I am longing to hear all his news. It must be so nice to see strange countries. I wonder if I mean Jonathan and I, shall ever see them together. Oh, there is the 10 o'clock bell ringing. Goodbye. Your loving Mina.